In this video, we're going to take a look at table formatting. I've got a couple of tables here that we can play with for formatting. And in order to format a table, you need to have the table ribbons visible up there, and that only happens when you click inside a table. So when I click inside my table here, table tools pop up, and there's a design tab and there is a layout tab. And the design tab has to do with what your table looks like, and the layout tab has more to do with the structure of your table, although there's a little bit of overlap between them. So we're going to look at what's on the design tab in this video. Okay, so it appears that I have already selected an option here. We're going to look at the table styles first, which is what occupies most of the ribbon. And we're going to go down and click on the More button, this little arrow with a hash mark behind it. And we should get a live preview here of whatever it is that we select over here on the left. And we've got some options for plain tables. We've got, and that's interesting, this one actually changes the font on the table headings. But it gives us a little bit of shading, it shows the borders. We've got what they call grid tables right here, and if you look at these rows, there really aren't all that many options. Everything on this row is the same except for the color. Everything on this row is the same except for the color, and every row is like that. And the first column is the blue variant, and the second one is the red variant, and so on. So we've got some grid tables, we've got some list table options, and it looks like the difference between a grid and a list is I don't see too many vertical lines over here. Mostly it's just horizontal borders rather than vertical borders. So it appears that that's what Microsoft considers the difference between a grid table and a list table. Okay, so let's go and we'll go down here and pick one of these let's pick one of the more colorful ones. So, and by the way, you notice every time you look at one of these and pause the mouse over it, a name will pop up. So this is Grid Table 4 Accent 1, and this is Grid Table 4 Accent 2, Grid Table 4 Accent 3, and so on. So they can be specified by name. Okay, so we have a top row that is a darker color, so usually if you have headings you want them to look a little different than everything else. We also have a left column here that looks a little different from everything else. It's not the shading, but the text is bold. And then we have banded rows. Okay, now if you look on the table style options to the left of our table styles up here, you see we've got 6 check boxes, and 3 of them are currently turned on. One is for the header row, so that's this row right here. If I turn that off, it will make it look just like every other row. Okay, I'm going to turn it back on. There's a total row. If I click on that, it makes the bottom row look different. So sometimes you may have a total row at the bottom of your table and you want it to look different, then you can turn this on. I've also got banded rows, and if I click on that, it's turned on now. If I click on it and turn it off, the bands disappear. But the bands usually make it easier for your eye to work its way across the page, so that's probably a good idea. First column is turned on, which means that it did something to make the first column different. In this case, it made everything bold. If I turn that off, the bold should go away. I'm going to turn that back on. There's also an option for last column, and you may have some totals or something over here at the last column, and you want them to look different as well, so you would turn that on. And there's also an option here, I don't think you use this one very often, for banded columns, and if I click on that, it will make every other column purple. Now I've also got banded rows, and I don't think you want to mix these two. So let's turn off banded rows, and now you can see every other column is the same color. And that's probably not as helpful as having banded rows, because banded rows make it easier for your eye to work its way across the page. So those are some options that you can easily turn on that may make it a little bit easier for you to format your table. And there's something else I want to point out too. Let's just take a quick look at these colors here on this row. We've got black and blue and red and green and purple. And let's go to our design tab over here for a second. And on the design tab, we've got a bunch of themes. And what I'm going to do is, we probably have the office theme by default here. And I'm going to pick the facet theme. And actually, I'm not going to pick it. I'm just going to pause the mouse over it. And you see the theme colors determine, or the theme determines what the theme colors are. And so if you change the theme after you've already done something as far as formatting your table, you're going to get different colors. Now, and probably some different fonts as well. You'll notice that the first line is still different. The first column is still bold, but my colors are changing, my fonts are changing. So you probably want to select your theme before you do anything else. So I'm not going to change the theme. We're just going to leave it that way. But let's go back to our table tools, and let's go to the Design tab. And we have an option for shading. And if we click on shading, we can change the shading for a cell or whatever cells that we've selected. So if for some reason I want the cells in this row to look different, I can go up here and click on shading, and I can pick a color, and that row looks different. Most of the time, I don't think you're going to want to select individual cells for different shading. Okay, then we've got border styles, and if we click on this, we get a bunch of choices here for our border styles. Let's go over here and like pick the red one. And we don't actually see anything change here, but we do see our cursor change into a little pen. And now if I click and drag the mouse over any part of my border here, I'll just click at the top of the word budget here, and I get a red border there. And if I click at the bottom, I get a red border. And so any segment that you click on, you can turn to whatever color it is that you selected. And you can also click and drag, which makes it easier to do a whole bunch of borders at the same time. There's some other options here. The first option here is the kind of the style of the border. You can have dotted lines all the way up to some fancy lines up here. And let's just pick a real heavy one there, and then we click up there, and you see I get that border. And I don't really like that very much. Let's undo that. And we've also got some options to change our pen color here, so I can change the pen color to whatever I want and start clicking, and I get a bright red now instead of a dark red. Let's undo that one as well. So I've got some options here for, and then the line weight here, which is how thick it's going to be. Now I've got, a triple line here, so let's actually go back to a single line. And then for weights, it's going to be a solid line. So I can go here, and if I click and drag on that, I'll get a fat red line. Now, and you notice I have the border painter button gets pushed in when you select that. So when you're done, you want to get rid of that pen. Just click on the border painter here and turn that off, and now you're back to your regular cursor. I'm going to delete, or not delete, but undo all of the changes that I've made here. So let's go and wonder if I click on this again, if it will. It will. So now I'm back to where I was before. Probably a more useful way to do your borders is to use the borders button up here and click on the down arrow. And you've got a bunch of choices here for doing, the bottom or the top or whatever of whatever cell you happen to have selected. So my cursor apparently is in this cell right now. So if I choose bottom border, it'll do a bottom border of whatever I have selected. If I do a top border or a left border or a right border, and so I can just click on those. And there's a bunch of choices. You can even do diagonals here if you want to have something kind of crossed out. But the most useful place on this entire menu option is the borders and shading down here at the bottom. And so we've got an option for borders. We're not going to look at page border or shading. We're just going to look at borders tab here. And you get this little preview over on the side, okay? And before you do this, you want to select whatever borders you want to change. And I'm actually going to select the entire, whoops, I can't do that. I have to cancel first and then select the whole thing. So it's going to apply to whatever you've selected. So let's go to our borders button here, and let's go to borders and shading. And there's a preview over here, okay? Now let's make this something that's obviously different from purple. So let's pick red. And you notice my borders don't change to red. Nothing really happens. Nothing happens over here until I actually click on the borders. So if I want the left border of my selection to be red, I click here. Let's make that a little bit thicker. Okay, so it's easier to see. And you see now that didn't change either. I got to click again if I want the fat line. I'm just going to click on OK now, and you'll see what we get. We get a red on the outside of whatever I had selected. Let's go back to borders again and go to borders and shading. And now this one is for the top of whatever I have selected. I missed. Let's try clicking there. Whoops, I went back to purple. Let me click on, yeah, I messed that up. Let's go back to red and let's make it fat. And we're going to put one on the left outside, the right outside, the top, and the bottom, and then we're going to click on OK. And since I had the entire table selected, I get that red around the entire table. Now let's go back in here and let's take a look at the inner borders. Let's go to borders and shading again. And let's make the inner borders something that is obviously different from that. Let's do green. That should show up very well. And we'll actually make it a different thickness. We'll make it really fat. We'll make it 6 points. Still nothing here. Okay? But if I want my interior vertical borders, then I click on that. Now let's click on OK. And you'll see the vertical borders but not the horizontal ones. Now let's go back here and go to borders and shading again. And this time, see, it went back to red. So I have to go back to green, and I have to go back to 6 points. So you kind of want to do this all at once instead of going back and forth. And if I click there, and I click too close to this line right here. So now I need to go back, and this is getting kind of frustrating, and make this a 3-point line, and I'm going to be real careful where I click this. Actually, you can avoid clicking up here just by clicking on the buttons down here. So you click on the button that corresponds to the border, and we've got 3 down here for the 3 vertical lines, 3 here for the 3 horizontal lines, and that might be a safer way to do it, as I think I just demonstrated. Okay, now let's click on OK, and there it is. So everything, we've covered everything here that's on the design tab, and all the things on this tab have to do with the way that your document or your table looks. And in the next video, we'll take a look at the layout tab, which has more to do with the structure of your table than with the appearance of your table.